안녕하세요. UK Study and Career Talks의 마지막 세션에 참석해 주셔서 감사합니다. 저는 주한영국문화원 교육사회실 홍지현입니다. 이번 세션은 영국 아트 혹은 디자인 유학을 꿈꾸는 분들을 위한 전공 토크 시간인데요. 영국 혹은 해외 유학을 준비하고 있는 예술 분야 예비 유학생이나 혹은 꼭 유학이 아니더라도 국제적인 포트폴리오 트렌드에 대해서 알고 싶은 분들께 유익한 시간이 될 수 있기를 바라면서 준비했습니다. 먼저 영국 아트 명문대학교 골드스미스에서 학생들을 가르치는 교수님의 프레젠테이션을 먼저 보고 그 후에 질의응답 시간을 갖도록 하겠습니다. 시작에 앞서 간단한 당부의 말씀을 드리고자 합니다. 본 웨비나는 약 40분간 우리말로 진행될 예정입니다. 죄송해요. 50분간 영어로 진행될 예정입니다. 세션 진행 중에 발표자에게 반응을 많이 보여주시고 채팅창에 질문이나 퀴즈 답변도 작성해 주세요. 영국문화원의 세이프가딩 정책에 따라서 다른 참여자에게 불쾌감, 수치심을 주거나 공격적인 채팅을 작성하거나 개인정보를 요구하거나 게시하는 경우에는 바로 퇴장 조치되오니 양해 부탁드립니다. 양일간 6개의 웨비나를 함께 해주시고 만족도 조사까지 마치시면 저희가 그분들 중에서 추첨을 통해 한 분께 에어 프랑스 KLM에서 후원하는 영국 왕복 항공권을 선물로 드릴 예정이니까 끝까지 자리 지켜주시면 감사드리겠습니다. 그럼 지금부터 시작하겠습니다. 이제 프레젠테이션을 진행할 연사를 소개하겠습니다. 골드스미스 대학교의 에드워드 바그넬은 디자인 학부에서 학생들을 가르치고 계시고 디자인 컨설팅과 교육 그리고 디자인 적용 연구를 진행하는 파이 스튜디오에 소속되어서 연구를 진행하고 있는 아카데믹인데요. Hi Edward, thank you for waiting for opening in Korean. And dear everyone, I'm delighted to introduce our guest speaker, Mr. Edward Bagenal. He is a researcher and an academic at the Goldsmiths, and he works at a Pi Studio, which is an affiliated research body within Goldsmiths. Now, are we ready for your presentation, Edward?
Yes, and hello, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, perfect. Thanks very much. I shall begin then. So thanks very much for coming and attending this talk. Hopefully it's going to be useful for you. My name's Edward Bagnall. I'm a tutor and I'm also admissions tutor at Goldsmiths University. And that means I see a lot of portfolios. So hopefully I'm going to be able to offer you all some really useful advice today about what makes a good portfolio. To give you a bit of background about myself, I'm also a design practitioner. My career over the last 20 years has touched on exhibition design, graphic design, screen-based and web, animation, product interiors, a whole raft of different disciplines, as well as academic research and projects that I have done at university with various European funding councils to give you a better idea of my background. So what I'd like to talk to you today about are obviously portfolios. It's what you've come hopefully to pick up the tips about, as many of you will be applying for undergraduate or even graduate study in colleges in the UK. And what I'd like to go through today are three separate elements of kind of ideas surrounding portfolios to help you get a bigger picture and a better picture of how you can create those more successfully. So firstly, we're going to look at what portfolios are, why we have portfolios. Secondly, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about creating good portfolios for different purposes, but particularly for application for study at UK institutions. And thirdly, I want to talk about you and how you can represent yourselves and your practice and your creativity, particularly in portfolios, effectively. So let's move through. One thing I have to say is that at Goldsmiths in the design department, we are particular in that we are post-disciplinary. And what that means is that all of the programs generally in the design department at Goldsmiths don't see design disciplines as separate. So we don't have graphic design, interior design, fashion design, UX design programs separately. Everyone is mixed together, and they always have been, as far as I'm aware, in my experience at Goldsmiths in the design department. And we do that because quite often we find that our graduates shift between disciplines, and technologies arrive that if you have trained to be a graphic designer often, or a web designer, for instance, web platforms arrive that allow people to template their own websites. And if you've trained as a web designer, if you've done a degree in web design, sometimes that removes a huge part of your skill set and gives it to amateurs or laymen. So we like people to be able to shift and be agile in their careers, and we teach them to do that within their education. That doesn't mean, though, that this won't be useful if you just want to apply for a graphic design degree at one of the UK's wonderful, creative institutions. This advice still holds. It will be good advice if you're applying just for fashion or just for interior design, for instance. These are good general rules, and hopefully they'll be useful across the board. So firstly, what is a portfolio? We've moved into a space now where increasingly we're sharing our work and showcasing our design skills or our fine art skills or our fashion skills through digital media. Portfolios used to be things that you could bring physically and flick through and see original artworks or original drawings. And there's something wonderful about being able to see tangible objects that represent someone's creativity that can be lost in digital formats. So it's worth thinking about how you best recreate those tangible things that you are all creating, I'm sure, beautifully, and how you recreate those or capture those digitally to give them the best opportunity to shine through as the creative works that they are. And of course, photography is hugely important within that. So my first tip is use photography effectively and practice capturing and documenting your work with good photography. Lighting, clarity, using contrast, tone, and good focus are really vital. Use the best photographs you can. It's also useful in the future if you lose the actual physical work to have a really clear document of your own created, things that you've made. So who views a portfolio and why are they viewing the portfolio? In this case, you're getting advice, hopefully, that's useful about applying for academic institutions. So you're applying and the people viewing it will be people like me who are program leaders or tutors on the programs, on the courses that you're applying for. And why do we want to see it? Well, the reason we want to see this particular type of portfolio is to get a good representation for you to communicate well your skills. And there are particular skill sets, I think, that in my experience of seeing hundreds of portfolios over the last kind of 15 years, that are always things that we look for. So we want to see evidence of practical skills. What are the practical or technical skills that you can show in your making, whether it be drapery in fashion design or use of software in graphic design and use of composition, and mixing text and images effectively. So those practical skills are the first thing that really a good portfolio will contain and communicate. Obviously, then there's your social skills, and that's a really hard one because sometimes when we're just looking at a portfolio and it's previous to the interview stage, we want to see evidence that you are able to work with other people, and that will obviously be described in a personal statement, which is a written account of those kind of things as well. But a portfolio should show group projects or collaborations or evidence of you working together with other people. Also, your intellectual skill set. What is it that you're feeding your work with in terms of what you're reading, the things you're noticing, the exhibitions you're going to, the artists, designers that you love. How are you aspiring to new ideas and new ways of thinking, and how are those influencing your work is another thing that a good portfolio will contain. And also commercial and professional skills. And you know, some of you are at a very early stage in your design careers or your art careers, and there might not be as much experience that you have had that you can show. But when I talk about commercial or professional experiences and skills, it is about, you know, even if you've participated in something at your college, which was perhaps an organization, a student organization that related to your creative skill sets, you know, show us that. That is in many ways professional experience. It's working with other people in a professional capacity, even if it's just within your own college or an organization, you know, outside. Put those projects in, they're really great to see. Something very practical that, you know, it surprises me sometimes how often is missing in some portfolios is legibility, readability, and accessibility. So it's really important when you've got this great work that you're showing that it can be seen, you know, and technically giving people open access to the work, who are people like me, an admissions tutor, or anyone that you're showing the work to. It's really important that they can find it, get it, click through, and it be easy to view. So if you're using video, if you're making films, or if you're videoing and documenting any of your designing or making processes, that video should be easily accessible, and the advice would be to host it on, you know, universally accessible platforms like Vimeo or YouTube. Equally, if your entire portfolio is going to be hosted online, then there are other platforms that we look to for that kind of accessibility and open access, things like Behance or Issue. There are many others available, and I'm sure many of you will know better than me some of those that are available. But they have to be accessible. We have to be able to see your work. So make sure that is part of what you do to prepare your work when you send it to us. Also, of course, different operating systems. You know, sometimes we'll look at it on a phone if we're kind of on the commute before we're going to see it on when we get to the office, or we're going to have very old equipment. Sometimes you'd be surprised how old the computers are that some academics use. They can be PCs, they can be Macs. So test your portfolios. If you have a friend who has a PC and you've made it on a Mac, ask your friend to view it. Likewise, if you've made it on a PC, ask a friend with a Mac to view it. See that it's easily found and easily viewable. Equally, if you're asked to upload a portfolio as a file, as a document, then you need to make sure that the way you've designed it is locked in. And my advice is always that PDF files are a really good way to lock in things like fonts and you know, your construction of the portfolio. I've received PPT portfolios, and someone's used a wonderful font. I don't have that wonderful font on my system, and when I open the PPT, it jumps to a different font. All the sizes move. Some of the text moves off the page. A PDF locks that, so find a way to save it as a PDF if you can, and the format then allows it to be read as you've intended it, as you've designed it. But ensure that those files are not too large, if possible. You know, if you're going through 100 portfolios and one portfolio takes 2 minutes to open because it's hundreds of megabytes, then it's really difficult and it creates a bad experience all around. So try and maintain this file size, find a way to compress those files if you can, so that they are, you know, easy to be viewed. Readability. When you have, you know, entries in your portfolio that describe projects, it's really important that you have the context for the work described, the reasons that you were making something, the background, you know, the inspiration, the research that you did, described as text, alongside the work. I've received often portfolios full of images, and I know that in fine art, an ambiguity in the work is really important to the way the work questions the viewer. But describe that you are, you want this to be ambiguous in a piece of writing. Always describe the context for the work, even if they're meant to be profoundly ambiguous. Describe that and tell us what they are, what it is that you're trying to describe with the work. Information hierarchy. This is a famous example of how to use text and fonts and styles of fonts effectively to create a hierarchy of information. Take your reader through the journey of how they should look and read through chronologically or in the right order as you intend it, and use those fonts and organization of information well. So one of the things that we all love to see when we look in a portfolio is not just the wonderful final pieces, the outcomes of your work and your creative skills and your creativity, but also the research, what it is that you discovered and how you discovered it. It's quite a difficult thing to document. Generally, research, as it appears in good portfolios, can be classified in two ways: primary and secondary research. So primary research are things like observing, asking, seeing, questionnaires, interviews, films you take of things or situations or people that you're designing for to better understand the context of the use of the things that you're designing. Here's an example of a project about rain that was in a portfolio, and this student went to a museum when it was raining and took pictures of the rain around and analysed their primary research, their observations about rain, and that informed their project, and they're writing here about how that then went on to inform some of the design developments. Secondary research, published sources, books. We're a university. Research is so often published within printed material, and books are a great example of that. What do you read? What other theories are you drawing on to inspire your own thinking and working? What research is there that has been done already by other people, and certainly, key research findings in certain disciplines and subject matter you should be able to find, and often they appear in books. Equally, there are published sources online, of course, but quite often you have, you ask someone in an interview about a piece of research in their portfolio, and you say, oh, who published this research? Who did this research? And they say Google. And of course, it isn't Google that actually did the research. And so it's really important to find your sources. Equally, for data that justifies some of the projects that you do, the ideas behind the projects. These have to be valid sources, and we want to see where you got them from, because they're the reason you're doing what you're doing often, or you're making the decisions about what you're doing in the way you are. So references, citations, we would love to be able to learn a little from your work as well. We're all researching together, and when you provide references for the sources, for the ideas and the justifications and evidence that you're using to back up your work, it's really interesting for us, and it also shows us that you're being rigorous intellectually and academically. So references and citations, vital. So now, of course, the fun bit, the bit we all love as designers, the process, the design process in a portfolio, seeing how you guys, create ways, new ways to use drawing and making, and how you document that process and how you include it in a portfolio is vital. It's one of the most enjoyable parts of any portfolio for people reading a portfolio, is to see not just the magical things you create, but the way you work. So drawings, lovely, beautiful things to see in a portfolio. Original drawings really communicate so much about the way you work and the way you design. Using diagrams to break down complex ideas as they emerge in the world around us. As design thinkers, understanding systems around the things that we design in and through. Diagramming things is a really good way to show that. Some of the better portfolios I see have ways of thinking that are diagrammed by the designer. Equally, developing and prototyping models. Here we see some stagecoach paper prototypes, quick models from drawings, really lovely to see. And the process, of moving from 2D to 3D in your work, from your drawings to physical outcomes and model prototypes, again, just as important to include in portfolios. And how you use a sketchbook also, how you journal and keep a diary visually of your ideas as they emerge and how they progress through the pages of your sketchbook are a wonderful thing to see. So original images of sketchbooks and the way you use, everyone uses their sketchbook differently. Some people stick things in, they collect material from everywhere. Some people just draw and write. Some people write lots of notes with a little diary. But the way you particularly design through a sketchbook is really wonderful to see it, because it's a really good idea of the quality of your practice as a creative. And including people in sketchbook work and the drawn development of ideas. I'm always slightly suspicious when someone is making wonderful objects, but they haven't considered how they fit into people's lives. So including people in sketch work and development of ideas gives them a context in the real world. And so that when we see that, we understand that you have empathy and you understand social life and how your design actually fits into a world full of people. So that's a really nice indicator of good designing, is people who include people in their development. And modeling, as these things turn from 2D to 3D, and capturing your modeling with good photography. This is a model example that would be thrown away. It's a piece of paper, but because the images have been taken relatively well and they've been noted and used to communicate what we're seeing, it's a lovely thing to see in a portfolio. How do you use photography as well? And returning back to this idea of capturing images well, but equally if you're applying particularly for a photography BA, that it's the core of your practice, but how can you use bold photography with good contrast, good composition, to express powerfully and in a compelling way your ideas. This is, representing how you film things. And this is something I call 4D, which is people filming themselves working as a way to document and reflect on their designing. So you're not just doing something and making it, you're also filming it and watching the film and talking about the film to see what else you can learn from that. So, using film and links to things like YouTube and Vimeo uploads of not just process work like this, but obviously final outcomes that you make as animations or films is really lovely to see and really useful. So, those kind of things are worth considering and including as well. And finally, for the final section of the talk, I wanted to talk about you. You are all hugely different, individual, creative people. And it's really important that you don't think that there's just one way to do a portfolio or one format. And quite often, when you use a platform that hosts portfolios, they will try and format your portfolio for you. And that's fine, but we need to see your individuality, and you need to express your individuality as well as a creative individual, advocating for your passions and for changes you desire too. We want to see a diversity of interests. What else is there that influences your designing or your work in fashion or your architecture projects? As well as those, what else do you do? Are you in a band? Do you play sports? Do you love to sing? How do they mix in with your creative work And what are those other things that make you different to other people? And I think that's important because those individual elements within all of the people that we try and mix together in good groups for learning within the design courses that we put together create divergent thinking when we work together as groups. Because you have such different experiences and different interests, we create divergent thinking much more effectively. And divergent thinking means looking in different ways at problems and solving problems by drawing from very diverse interests. And often, you know, even finance companies and corporate companies will give people divergent thinking tests as part of their interview process to see how creative they are. And so that divergent interest and divergent thinking is something we want to see in portfolios as well. And a certain humour is a difficult one. You know, we don't expect you to be telling us jokes in your portfolio or be clowns, but certainly a kind of humour and playfulness in the work that you show us is something that is a really vital quality. Often the issues and subject matter we deal with in design is quite serious, and they're big challenges that we're facing constantly, globally, and they take a lot of focus. If you have a playfulness in your practice, it brings levity, brings lightness to how we work together to solve those problems. And it's a really important faculty, a really important quality within designing often. So when we see that in a portfolio, it's a real positive. Also, your sensibility and your humour, but also a social sensibility is something we want to see. How have you worked together in a group? Show us some points at which your research reaches out and involves other people, or if you've done projects that involve a group or a team of people, show us those. How did that work? Give us your account. Did it work well? What were the challenges? You know, tell us how you work and what your social sensibility is within your practice in designing. And of course, we also look for critical thinking. Not just advocating for your passions and the things you love, but for changes as well. The desire for the changes you want to see in the world around you are just as important as those passions that you have that are positive. It's meeting challenges and knowing that you have agency and power to change things through your designing and through your work. What are the challenges? What are the things that you want to see change in? And how have you met those with some of your work, perhaps? That's a lovely thing to see in a portfolio as well. So I bring that talk to an end. Hopefully that's been useful for you and enjoyable. And I shall hand over.
Thank you, Edward, for such a wonderful presentation. I myself have been very inspired because I studied communication design at college. And I always thought of portfolio as this, a medium to just show off what you can do. However, to think about portfolio as yourself and to be to advocate your passion through it, I think it's new and almost inspiring. And I hope and I'm sure that audience loved it too. Now, shall we move on to the Q&A session? We have now 20 minutes left, so we'll try to cover as many questions that we can. 이제 저희가 20분 정도 남았는데요. 사전 등록 때 받았던 질문과 채팅으로 올라온 라이브 질문에 대한 질의응답 시간을 갖도록 하겠습니다. 저희가 시간 관계상 모든 질문을 할 수는 없을 수도 있어요. 이 부분 미리 양해 부탁드리고 지금 이제 질문을 올려주시면 저희가 최대한 이제 많은 분들이 관심 있어 하실 만한 부분들 저희가 언급하고 또 질문 대답 들어보는 거 하도록 하겠습니다. 그리고 이번에는 저희 그 골드스미스의 국제학생처의 제이크 롱리 씨가 함께 질문 답변 도와줄 예정이에요. We have Mr. Jake Longley from International Office at Goldsmiths and joining us. Hi, Jake. You're welcome to answer some of the questions that you can, along with Edward here.
Hi, thank you very much for having me. Yes, I'm happy to help answer any questions on the application process or life at Goldsmiths, things like this.
Thank you. First, I would like to go over a question received at the webinar registration. So here is a first question from non-art design major student who wants to pursue a career in art design field. So do you recommend studying BA like all over again in the art design field again in the UK? Or do you have it, or can someone just apply for MA and start from there when they don't have a background in art and design? 저희 질문이 학사에서 아트를 하지 않으신 전공 졸업자분께서 아트 디자인을 이제 영국 가서 하고 싶은데 공부를 이럴 때는 학사부터 하셔야 되는지 아니면 석사부터 할 수도 있는지 그리고 and if you have any tips for students who don't have art background on creating persuasive portfolio. 그리고 포트폴리오를 어떻게 구성하는 게 좋을지 이제 아트 디자인을 이제 백그라운드로 가지고 있지 않으면 이제 경험이라든지 이렇게 좀 부족할 수 있잖아요. 그런 부분을 질문 주신 분이 있었습니다. So I think can you take this, Edward?
Absolutely, yeah. There are two really good questions there. Answering the first about whether if you have a degree in a different subject, you can move into a master's degree. I would say that it depends on a few factors. If you have experience professionally, particularly, that would count, I suppose, towards design experience or even related experience in any vaguely creative or you know, tangentially creative fields. That can be something that would allow you to move into a master's degree from a BA, absolutely, in a different subject. But we do have a graduate diploma, and there are many graduate diplomas, you know, in the UK as well. And that is a stepping stone program. Graduate diploma in design at Goldsmiths allows you to improve your English language at the same time as improving some of your design skills. So even if you work in a different field, you can land in the graduate diploma program and become conversant, become familiar with design in the UK, and also, you know, help with your languages available within that study as well. So that's a really good stepping stone, I think, rather than doing a whole nother degree in design and then stepping into a master's. So there are two routes there. The second question in terms of students who come from publishing or, you know, corporate work, and they say, all right, I'm going to change tack, I'm going to move into design now, and they want to create a portfolio. We welcome, you know, people from different disciplines. We're post-disciplinary, not just in creative design, but also we would like to think that you can add design onto your practice as, you know, someone who works in technology or sciences or publishing, for instance, quite easily. And that diversity of input is really useful for the program also and for the student group. So that's, you know, putting together a portfolio within that would involve showcasing projects that you have been involved in. An example I can give you is a student we had recently who gave us a portfolio of her written work, which was working in publishing, in magazine publishing. And she'd worked with design teams, but she was producing the written articles for a magazine, working in fashion. But it would work equally well if it was any kind of, you know, focus. And she gave us three articles, three projects, and examples of those three projects were a portfolio. And she came and studied on the graduate diploma successfully and became one of our brilliant, one of the better students on the masters because of that diversity, I think, of experience that she brought. It was a really interesting journey for her. And so absolutely, put together some projects that are things you've created, you know, that you have creative input in, and submit them with an explanation of that. We welcome those diverse, you know, practitioners into design. Absolutely.
I see. Thank you so much. I think the information on the postgraduate graduate diploma program that people from other sectors could kind of apply in. I think that's very useful. 그 graduate diploma라는 과정을 통해서 이제 마스터스를 준비할 수 있는 그런 프로그램을 담당하고 계신다고 합니다. 이 에드워드 선생님이. 그래서 이런 정보도 매우 유용할 것 같고요. 그리고 and also about the how to view yourself from non-arts background. It's just not a what do you say? It's not just a weakness, but then it could be seen as interdisciplinary, and I think that concept is inspiring too. 자기가 이제 아트 백그라운드가 없다고 해서 꼭 이게 약점이 아니라 또 이제 새로운 크리에이티브를 보여줄 수 있는 그런 뭐랄까 융합적인 사람이 될 수 있다는 점, 그렇게 보여질 수 있다는 점도 말씀 주신 것도 매우 도움되는 것 같습니다. So can we move on to a live questions that we have? So I wanted to mention this one. Any commonalities you see in portfolio of Asian or Korean students submitted for admission? Either good ones or not so good ones. 우리 아시아나 한국에서 이제 들어오는 포트폴리오, 그러니까 그 입학 지원 시에 받는 포트폴리오 중에서 혹시 뭐 항상 약간 공통되는 점, 뭐 좋은 점도 있을 수 있고 또 나쁜 점도 있을 수 있겠죠. 그런 부분들에 대해서 질문하셨습니다. So I think it's about the subject. So Edward, can you take this as well?
Of course, absolutely, and this is another really good question. And there are some common features that we often see. I think the education systems or the education qualifications that often students come from when they're applying to UK institutions for creative disciplines are key towards employment, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's great. You want to go and work in an industry, the creative industry, but quite often we find that we're receiving portfolios that would be more appropriate for commercial or industry use if you're applying for a job. And the academic portfolio that we want to see is a little bit more than that. Those kind of professional skill sets, which I did touch on, are important, but equally, there are other routes out of designing, researching, academia, working with charities, working as government, governance advisory kind of bodies, and design increasingly is moving into that. Design thinking is hugely important in those kind of, sectors. So those kind of things are things that we need to see you representing more creative thinking through, and also a bit more of the kind of social aspects, I suspect, to designing that aren't just about commercial products, but that are about how people live in the world and how we can enrich that. And those are the things that we get to play with in an academic setting, where when you have profit margins in industry, you don't have as much freedom to do. So we want you to have a passion to do that, to come and have a bit of creative play, and we want to see that you can do that. So that's missing quite often, I think, because the focus is on industry quite often, a little too much focus, perhaps.
I see. Thank you for such a. I think it's very insightful. 그 말씀하신 것 중에서 이제 특히 이제 아시아나 한국에서 오는 지원자들이 되게 굉장히 이제 취업, 그리고 이제 커머셜한 쪽으로, 굉장히 상업적인 쪽으로 이제 치중이 되어 있는 편이 있어서 조금 더 자유롭고 좀 더 크리에이티브한 모습들 보여줄 수 있는 그런 부분들이 많이 나오면 좋겠다. 왜냐면 뭐 당연히 필요하지만 뭐 그 취업이 얼마나 잘 되는지 이것도 필요하지만 그 이제 여기 학교에서 보고 싶은 것은 얼마나 이 재미있는 것들을 많이 할 수 있냐, 이런 것이기 때문에 라는 말씀, 코멘트 주셨습니다. 도움이 되셨으면 좋겠습니다. 그리고 저희가 이제 10분 남았으니까 또 저희가 한 2개 정도 더 받아볼 수 있을 것 같아요. 한 2가지 정도. 중간 과정 작업 과정 관련해서 말씀드릴게요. So I have another question about the portfolio. What if you have just a final product and not have the process written or process, what do you say, recorded? What should someone do to have that outcome included in the portfolio?
Absolutely. I mean, that, we don't all focus obsessively on our process. We don't all film ourselves working and
like 40.
Absolutely, I understand that, and I think a written account of how the thing came about is just as valid as seeing it in often. It's nicer to see it, but it's about actually just your ability to reflect on the process of getting to the final thing, not necessarily showing it. It's about us seeing or reading or hearing someone taking seriously the way that they got to the final result, and not just not thinking about that and saying, I'm going to make, a kettle or a milk carton or a dress, without thinking about how that process works or what or the reasoning. So it's about an ability to reflect, and you can communicate that in writing as well.
I see. To write about the process that you had in your mind, and then showing it there, even though you don't have pictures and recordings of that.
Yes.
뭐 사진이라든지 영상이라든지 이렇게 과정을 정말 보여줄 만한 것이 없어도 이제 내가 왜 그 생각을 하게 되었는지 이제 프로세스를 이렇게 차근히 적어서 이제 라이팅으로 보여주면 이제 쓴 작업물로 보여주는 것이 이제 또 방법이 될 수 있겠다, 이렇게 조언 주셨습니다. So another question. So I think this is what students who are submitting their portfolio really struggle with. How many is too many, and how many is just right, and how many is just too little? Do you have a kind of, since you've seen lots of portfolios, Edward?
Yeah, 3 is a definite bare minimum. 3 projects is always a bare minimum. Yeah, we need, if you can't compare 2, you can compare 2, but you don't get an idea of the diversity of practice. So 3 will show at least that you are moving through different projects, and some degree of, from one to the other, and then an improvement or a development or a difference. I've looked at projects that have 12, 20 portfolios that have 12 or 20 projects in, and if I'm brutally honest, when we're going through many applications, I will find those portfolios and look at the most interesting projects in them. So, whilst we have hundreds of applications coming in, we try and dedicate and look through carefully. But if there are many projects, it's very difficult to read each one and we only have a certain amount of time to dedicate to each case and each application. So, 12 projects is, I would say, top limit. It depends. It's so dependent on your experience, the stage in your career.
Mm-hmm.
And if there's lots of tiny projects that are a series of short little projects, then there can be more. So, but yeah, between 3 and 12 is a good rule of thumb.
Okay. 그래서 3개부터 12개 정도 안에 사이에 있는 숫자로 하시면 좋을 것 같다고 합니다. So I have a question for Jake. If you can unmute yourself. So I wanted to ask if there is since you see lots of international students applying for Goldsmiths, do you have any tips or any suggestions or advice that you would like to give to especially Korean applicants? Anything from the process or the application itself?
Yeah, so I mean, the first things to think about is application deadlines. So for things like BA design, we have the Ucas deadline, which is actually today. But what that basically means is up until today, you could get equal consideration. So you would be equally considered against other candidates. After today, if there are spaces left available, you can still absolutely apply, but you just have to wait your turn in the list. But there's no problem applying after today. That's totally fine. I think the biggest thing from that I see from my side of the work that we do, so I see the applications as they come in. But also speaking to students before that process. I think the biggest thing is thinking about your personal statement and what it is that you want to say about yourself that then kind of complements your portfolio as well. So thinking about what it is, why you've chosen this course at this university, what you want to do with your future career, how does this course help that future career, and then also the biggest thing is articulating and explaining any extracurricular activities or any independent research that you've done outside of school or outside of work. So what's your passion for this subject? Where does it come from? So to give you an example, for myself, since I was 4 years old, I always wanted to be a drummer in a rock band. That's what I wanted to do. Now, I studied music, I did it at university, I did it for a master's, and that was great. But what was the passion and the driver for that? And it was watching bands. My mum used to work for a band, and it was watching bands play since I was 4 years old, and it just it burned like a flame inside of me, and trying to explain that in a personal statement. So when you go to things like design and art, I understand that kind of creative feeling. So where does that come from in you, and what is it you want to do with that feeling, and where do you want to go with it? So yeah, I think getting things like that across in your personal statement are super important.
I see. So think about the deadlines and then the personal statements, through personal statement and portfolio to show your passion. I think that was the gist, if I got it right.
Yeah.
네, 그래서 이제 말씀하신 건 특히 이제 데드라인 잘 지키는 거. 왜냐면 데드라인을 지키면 그 안에 낸 분들은 다 이제 똑같이 평가받기 때문에 데드라인을 꼭 지켜서 하시는 거랑, 그리고 퍼스널 스테이트먼트랑 오늘 했던 포트폴리오를 통해서 자기의 열정을 꼭 보여주는 건 그런 것이 중요할 것 같다고 말씀 주셨어요. 이제 저희가 사실은 더 많은 질문을 소화하고 싶은데 저희가 시간이 이제 거의 끝에 다다라서 다 하지 못하는 것 양해 부탁드립니다. 저희가 꼭 질문 저희가 받아야 되는 것들이 있으시면 저희한테 알려주시면 저희가 또 개인적으로 물어서 조금 답변 드리는 방법으로 하겠습니다. Thank you so much for the Q&A. I think it's very, I think it was really useful for the students to be learning about your views and whatnot. I wanted to give, we wanted to, 저희 이분들한테 한번 따뜻한 박수와 응원과 격려와 그리고 감사, 많은 분들이 지금 박수 쳐주시는데요. 네, 부탁드립니다. Thank you so much for the presentation and the Q&A session. It was wonderful to have you here.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having us, and thank you everyone for attending. It's been really great to speak to so many people today.
네, 감사합니다. 앞으로 저희 영국 유학 관련된 최신 정보 또는 행사 소식을 받아보고 싶다면 저희 주한 영국문헌 스터디 UK 카카오톡 채널을 추가해 주세요. 그리고 저희 영국 유학 저희 이번 이 웨비나를 후원해주신 에어프랑스 KLM에서 유학생들이 관심 있을 만한 학생 운임 상품을 이제 저희한테 알려주어서 안내드리도록 하겠습니다. 그 에어프랑스 KLM이 지금 여기 슬라이드에 보이는 것처럼 영국의 많은 도시로 취항을 하고 있는데요. 영국 유학생 편리한 스케줄 확인하셔서 이용하시면 좋을 것 같습니다. 그리고 학생 운임도 별도로 있는데요. 학생 운임은 여러 가지 혜택이 있는데 추가로 수화물 2개를 무료로 이제 해준다고 하니까 그 부분도 이제 생각하시면 좋을 것 같고, 항공권은 무료로 변경이 가능하고 또 여행을 취소했을 때도 환불 가능한 바우처를 요청하실 수 있다고 합니다. 항공권이 아예 그 이제 항공사 측에서 취소된 경우는 환불이 가능하고요. 학생 운임을 예약할 때는 에어프랑스 KLM 웹사이트 가셔서 승객 선택란에서 이제 학생을 선택하시고 예약하시면 됩니다. 학생 증빙 서류가 꼭 필요할 수 있으니까 이 부분도 꼭 유념 부탁드립니다. 이렇게 저희 마지막 세션도 끝이 났습니다. 저희 세션 소개 때 말씀드렸던 것처럼 저희 6개 웨비나 함께 다 해주시고 만족도 조사까지 마친 분들 중에서 저희 추첨을 통해서 한 분한테 저희가 방금 말씀드렸던 후원사의 왕복 항공권 선물로 드리는데요. 저희가 만족도 조사가 나갈 예정이니까 그 부분 꼭 답변 부탁드립니다. 저희 이틀에 걸친 UK Study and Career Talks에 참석해주신 여러분 너무 감사합니다. 모두 건강 조심하시고 다음에도 유익한 행사로 찾아뵙도록 하겠습니다. 감사합니다.